Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Griffin. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of VASS, the Virginia Association of School Superintendents. We're so glad you're with us today. We have a really important topic today to discuss. Virginia has new legislation around paid family medical leave, and we have our VASS partner, American Fidelity, with us, who are experts in this area. So I'm going to introduce to you Putty David. He's a great partner with VASS. I'm going to turn it over to you to get started.
All right. All right. I appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. And I want to say thanks again for allowing us to take about an hour of your time in the summer to go over something that's extremely important. I know you've heard a lot about this. If you've heard only a little bit about it, we're going to try to bring you up to speed. I pretty much know everybody that's on here, I'm sure, at one point or one time. Eric and I have met you at a conference or one of your schools or a function. So briefly today, so I won't go in big detail. The reason I say that about myself, I've been in the insurance industry over 35 years, and I love what I do. And to jump right into this PFML in Virginia, it might seem like it's a long way away, but schools need to start planning now for the administrative, the financial, and the workforces that it's going to change. What you're going to find out is American Fidelity has been working with schools through implementing the PFML through other states, and we understand the unique considerations that you face on a daily basis. Now, our goal today is to help you understand the new law and identify practical steps to start preparing. We have Eric Bauer on here. He's a state manager. You've probably met him through me. And if you haven't met Melissa McDuffie yet, I'll let her introduce herself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for having me. Like Putty said, my name is Melissa McDuffie, and today we're going to go over navigating paid family medical leave in Virginia. So we will get started here. Let me switch this slide. Okay, there we go. My title here at American Fidelity is Strategic Benefits Consultant. And like Putty said, we have been working with school districts in other states like Oregon, Colorado, Delaware, and now soon to be Maryland. We've already been working on the education front for that side, like educating the employers on the impacts and things like that. Because we do and have already worked on this in other states, we have kind of that unique perspective that will kind of prepare you based on what we've seen in other states and how that has impacted the employers and the employees and all of those things. So before we do get started on some of these details, though, I do have to give you this quick disclaimer. We are an insurance company. We are not a law firm. We are not, we do not provide legal advice. We do not provide tax advice. So all of this information that we're sharing with you is just general information about what this program is, and then some anecdotal information about what we've seen in other states. So to the extent that you do have questions that are specific to your situation, specific to your employees or your operations, we would encourage you to contact your own tax and legal advice to see how those requirements would apply to you and your situation. So even though we can't provide you that information, we will give you enough general information where you know what questions to ask for your own advisors there. Okay, so let's just kick off initially with what is Virginia's paid family and medical leave program. And like Putty kept saying, PFML, that's kind of our shorthand here. We've seen this in so many different states. So as most of you are probably aware, in April of this year, Virginia joined a kind of growing number of states that enacted a law that implements this paid family medical leave program. So it does provide or establishes an insurance fund, essentially, that will provide eligible workers and participating self-employed people with temporary paid leave benefits. And once implemented, it will be funded through employer and employee contributions. And then the employee portion is going to be taken from payroll deduction. So that's your first hint here that you're going to have to change some of your operations, right? There's going to be a new deduction that's potentially coming out of those employees' paychecks. So that's kind of the first hint of things that are going to need to change there. So what exactly will this program do? So it will provide paid family, medical, military caregiver, qualifying exigency, and we call it SAFE leave. The actual statute calls it safety services leave. Those types of leave you're probably pretty familiar with the exception of the safe leave part, right? So you're kind of used to administering leave for those paid family, medical, military caregiver through FMLA or similar laws that you might already be administering there. So a lot of employers in the States, when we first start working there, they go, oh, well, this is going to be super easy. We've already been doing leave administration. So this is just an addition to that, but we are already used to doing this. But I do want to point out that because this is going to be an established program by the state where you pay money into the state program or a private carrier if you decide to go that way, or self-funding, because you pay into a pot of money and then the employee has to apply for that leave, this is going to be the first time probably in the history of ever that your employees are going to someone else to ask if they can take leave. And that does put the schools in kind of a difficult position because, at least initially when these programs start, there's a little bit of confusion on the employee side about, okay, I want to take this paid leave, but how do I do it? And so what we've seen in other states is employees will go ahead and go to the state or go to their private carrier and they will apply, and then they will just not come to work. And then the employer's going, well, where are you? You were supposed to show up to work. And they say, well, I applied for the leave. And so the education on the front end is really important to make sure that employees understand that this is a new program, but you still have the same obligations to tell your employer that you're going to be out on leave. And at the same time, you're doing a dual process of applying for the benefit from the carrier that is covering the actual payment of the benefit that the employee will receive. So moving on this slide, we do have that it does preserve employment status after 120 days of employment. So it is going to be a job protected leave for those employees that have been employed for 120 days, for at least 120 days. Now that doesn't mean, right, that if they haven't been employed for 120 days that we're not going to protect their job. That's going to be one of those scenarios that you're going to reach out to your legal counsel and say, hey, what are my obligations here? Because even if their job is not protected under this program, that doesn't mean it's not protected by some other law. So you're going to reach out to your legal counsel in those situations where you have a new employee that's wanting to take this leave. Now, Putty already kind of mentioned that this is 2 years away. So we see on those next two bullet points that we have contributions begin April 1st, 2028, and benefits begin December 1st, 2028. That is very, very common on these paid family medical leave programs. Most of the states have done it this way. We at American Fidelity, we call that the pre-funding period. So when we're talking about a state paying a benefit to employees, they have to build up the pot of money to pay that, right? So you have to have a period of time where contributions are being made, where employees are not taking the leave, not using the benefit, because they have to build up that pot of money so that come December 1st, when an employee applies, they have money to pay them. Now, what that means is you have to prepare in advance, well in advance of April 1st, 2028, to start making those payroll deductions, start making those contributions. The state right now, we don't know. There's a lot of unanswered questions about how the administration of this program is going to go, because all we really have right now is the statute. But we do know that the regulatory process is going to start relatively soon. The state is hosting, which is the Virginia Employment Commission. They are hosting some listening sessions coming up. I think the first one is next week. So if you're interested in seeing how these regulations are going to pan out, what obligations they might start requiring as far as reporting or anything that might impact the employer, then you're free to listen into those listening sessions. I did enroll in those, so you do have to enroll specifically, and then they send you a link for that. But it is really important to prepare for that in advance, even on the contribution side, because what we have also seen in other states is that a lot of times, whoever your payroll provider is, maybe they are not super prepared to start implementing it. We did have in Oregon, when that started a couple of years ago, even some of the major payroll providers missed that first deduction. And so the employers were like, what do we do? This payroll provider didn't do the deduction from the employees. How are we going to fix this? And so make sure that you have all of those details ironed out well in advance, and that you're notifying employees that those deductions are coming out before they see it come out of their paycheck. Okay, so in what situations are employees going to be able to take leave? We kind of briefly touched on that just a minute ago. They're going to be able to use it to bond with a new child within the first year after the birth, foster, or adoption placement, to care for a family member with a serious health condition, to deal with an employee's own serious health condition, to care for a covered service member who is the covered individual's next of kin or other family member, or for a qualifying military exigency, or for seeking safety services for the covered individual or a family member. Now, you will see on this slide that I have family member in some quotes there, and that's because family member is defined differently under this particular program than it is under FMLA. So when we talked about, okay, you're already used to administering leave, this is going to be one of the differences that is going to impact your operations. And so whoever's administering your leave, you want to make sure that you're educated, that they have the resources available to understand these eligibility criteria before this program goes into place. So under FMLA, family member is a parent, spouse, and child. And there's various legal relationships that come into there that kind of expand that a little bit, right? But under the Virginia Paid Family Medical Leave, it's going to be a parent, spouse, child, domestic partner, grandparent, grandchild, sibling, and certain individuals who regularly reside in the employee's home or whose relationship creates an expectation that the employee will provide care and who depend on the employee for care. So that's a mouthful, right? That's a lot of different things that I just said there. But the biggest impact there is that there are going to be situations where an employee is eligible for leave under this Virginia Paid Family Medical Leave program, and they are not eligible for FMLA. So there are going, even though the program is designed to, hey, this runs concurrently with FMLA, it can't run concurrently if the employee is not eligible for both at the same time. So we're talking about some complexities that are going to arise for those people who are administering your leaves for you. And it's just something that you want to keep in mind, that that's not always going to run concurrently because the eligibility criteria are different. Okay, so who is covered? So everyone on this call, you are a covered employer because it is nearly every single public and private employer in Virginia with at least one employee, and it does include local governments, including cities, counties, and public schools. So if you had a question about whether this is going to be required of you, the answer is likely yes. So the biggest kicker here is, okay, well, who is an eligible employee? So I have that on this slide here, and it's going to be those employees who meet the minimum monetary eligibility requirements under Virginia law, which is currently approximately $3,000 in the employee's base period, or somebody who's going to elect as a self-employed individual. Now, the important part right there is, what's the base period? When do they have to earn this $3,000? The base period is essentially basically the past year. It really goes based on completed calendar quarters. So 4 of the last 5 completed calendar quarters. But that $3,000 is a very minimal obligation when you're saying, okay, anybody who's earned $3,000 in the past year is going to be eligible for that. That means this is really broadening the scope of the employees who are going to be eligible for leave right now, or once this program takes effect. And that's going to be $3,000 earned, not just for you as an employer, but for any covered employer in the state of Virginia. So what does that mean? That means that you could potentially get an employee who starts to work and they are eligible for leave immediately because they already earned that $3,000 from someone else, from some other employer in Virginia. So in other states, we have seen that, and the employers, the schools there were going, oh my gosh, we do actually have employees that are applying for leave when they've only been here for a few weeks. That does create kind of a unique burden on our public schools, right? Because you rely on these employees, these individuals, to be there teaching your kids, supporting your kids, all of the things. And so it does create kind of a planning situation where you might have to start planning even more about, okay, how are we going to get substitutes in here? How are we going to get temporary employees in here? Because employees are eligible for this much, much sooner. And if it's anything like it is in what I've seen in the other states, you probably already have a little bit of trouble recruiting enough substitutes and recruiting enough temporary employees. So now is a really great time to start thinking about, okay, how can we start building this pool? How can we bring more people in there? How can we do some more recruitment, retention, make sure that we have enough employees to cover when people go out on leave. So once that employee's a covered individual monetarily, all they have to do is have a qualifying event, submit an application, and they have to be authorized to work in the United States at the time of their application. So just anecdotally speaking, we offer a private plan in some states. I don't know if we're going to do that in Virginia, which is just a substitute plan for the state plan, right? But because we offer it in some states, we do have kind of some unique insights into absenteeism numbers and the percentage of workforce that is going out on leave every year. And what we did see in Oregon is going to be our best example there, because I think we cover somewhere between 70 and 80% of the public schools there with our private plan. And most of those schools have said, hey, our absenteeism, or the number of people that are going out on leave, has increased 10%. Some of them are saying 20, 25, 30%. Some of them even higher than that. So when we're talking about, hey, employees are going to be able to take this early, we're also looking at potentially employees are going to take this leave often. So start planning now on how you want to kind of do better in recruiting subs and figure out how you're going to be able to cover for those absences. So next we're going to touch on how this is funded. And it is paid through payroll contributions that are generally shared between employers and employees. And so that contribution does stop if an employee reaches that Social Security wage base, but you do want to make sure that your payroll provider is prepared to take over that deduction from employees. Now, as an employer, you are more than they do allow for you to cover any part of the employee's portion. So you don't have to split it 50-50. You just can't ever charge the employee more than what the state plan would allow you to charge them. So depending on what they set the rate at, which they are going to set that initial contribution rate by October 1st of 2027, then you're going to look at, okay, how much is this really going to cost me? So if we want to look at what they've done in other states, if you want to start preparing and start keeping your budget in mind, which I know a lot of you do want to do, and that is really important for you. So what we saw in Oregon is they set the initial rate at 1% of gross employee wages. Colorado, they came in at 0.9% of gross employee wages. Maryland, they came in at 0.9, and Delaware, I believe, was either 0.8 or 0.9. So if you're looking at those types of programs and going, okay, well, maybe we'll end up in the ballpark there. Again, we don't know, and we won't know until the Virginia Employment Commission sets that rate. But if we look and learn lessons from those other states and say, okay, well, what if they come in at 1%? Then that means that this is going to cost you as the employer 50% of that rate, right? Because it's split 50-50. So if you take a look at your gross wages that you pay to employees in a month and go, okay, well, what's 1% of that? And I could potentially be responsible for half of that, then you would get an idea of what this program would cost you. So take those rates for what they are. If you want to just start guessing what this might cost you, then that would be a good way to start and start planning your budgets around that. And then, like I mentioned earlier, those payroll deductions do begin in April of 2028. Another thing that we have seen in other states is sometimes that will be a bargained issue where the unions will come in and say, hey, we want this school to try to cover part or all of the employee contribution. We do have some schools in Oregon that only for certain classes of employees are the schools covering the full portion for those employees. So also be prepared for that might end up happening as well. Okay, so next let's talk about the benefits that would be included. What exactly would an employee be entitled to? So they are going to be eligible for up to 12 weeks per benefit year for those qualifying reasons that we touched on earlier, with the one exception of that safe leave, or the leave for safety services, is going to be limited to 4 weeks per benefit year. So when we talk about a benefit year, what they look at is, at least the way that it's written in the statute right now, is they say, okay, the date that an employee first uses leave, we're gonna measure forward 52 weeks or sometimes 53 weeks if that would result in an overlapping benefit year. And so that will be renewable for employees every year after that 52 calendar weeks exhausts. So you will see employees that are taking leave every single year under this type of program. And when those employees do take that leave, they can take it continuously, they can take it intermittently, or on a reduced schedule basis. So when those employees take that, they They will then work with their medical provider, figure out how they're going to be taking this leave, if it's going to be continuous, intermittent. So that's going to be some back and forth with you all as well as you're trying to navigate those employee leaves. Okay, so the amount that they're going to be paid is essentially 80% of the covered individual's average weekly wages. Now, the average weekly wage is not going to be, you're not going to look at what you've paid that employee. That's going to be an amount, their average weekly wage is looked at as what they've made over the first 4 of the last 5 completed calendar quarters. You take the whole amount of money, they look at what they've made, they divide that up and go, okay, this is what your average weekly wage is. Now, you're not necessarily always going to have that information. The good news or bad news, depending on how you look at it, is you don't ever have to calculate an employee's benefit amount. Either the state or your private plan provider is going to calculate that for you based on the wages that have been reported for that employee. Now, the only way that you would have to calculate that is if you do a self-funded private plan, in which case then you would have to calculate that. But I have not encountered a lot of employers who have chosen to go that route because there are some additional requirements on the self-funding part. And because this is a very highly utilized benefit, sometimes the premiums versus the payouts can go upside down pretty quick. And so there is a lot of risk involved there. So the minimum weekly benefit, though, is $100 or 100% of that individual's average weekly wage if it's lower. And then the maximum weekly benefit is 100% of the state average weekly net earnings. And it is adjusted annually by the Virginia Employment Commission. But by and large, we're looking at 80% of that individual's average weekly wage and the maximum, which is of the state average weekly wage. So here is an example of an employee who earns approximately $52,000 a year. So we're looking at their average weekly wage is $1,000. So under this program, their benefit amount would be $800. So that's pretty straightforward math. It's easy in this particular situation. It gets a little bit more difficult if you have an employee who's job hopped a lot, because then you're looking at wage and hour reports that the state has on file. So if we were looking if this were available today, then the state average weekly wage is $1,507 and a penny. So we're just going to use that figure for today as we go through this next example. Again, this is adjusted annually, so this example would not be accurate next year or the year after. But if this benefit were available today, this is another example of an employee who makes roughly $100,000 a year. So this employee's average weekly wage is $1,923. The weekly benefit, 80% of that would be $1,538. And so because the actual weekly benefit is capped at the state average weekly wage, that employee would get $1,507. So this is kind of a sliding scale benefit amount that would be available to those employees. So anytime an employee is making, you have a higher wage earner, they're going to get less of a wage replacement. You get a lower wage earner, they're going to get closer to that 80% there. So it really is going to vary based on how much that employee makes. Now, when we talked earlier about, okay, well, I'm already used to administering FMLA, I can do this. We did talk about some of the differences there that might kind of skew that ability for those to run concurrently, and also highlight some educational opportunities for those employees who are administering the leave. So I have a chart here. This is not exhaustive. This is not exactly every single way that FMLA is going to be different from the paid family medical leave program. But this does tend to be the ones that are kind of most important to employers to understand off the bat. So if we start at the top, both of these do provide job protection. So that's very consistent. Those for Virginia, the paid family medical leave program, though, we do have to remember that the job protection applies at 120 days once that employee's employed for 120 days. And so the biggest thing that we see initially off the bat is what's the length of leave. So with paid family medical leave, you get up to 12 weeks and then 4 weeks for safety services. But again, no more than 12 per year. So even if 4 of those are safety services, then they would have the remainder left to take for some other type of qualifying leave under the paid leave program, but 12 weeks maximum per year. And then with FMLA, it's up to 12 to 26 weeks, because we know that in certain military circumstances that can be extended beyond the 12 weeks there. Health benefits continue on under both programs. And then most of that, the rest of you see allowing time to bond with a new child, including time to care for yourself or a family member, and then preparing for a military family member's deployment. Yes, 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 right? So now, does it allow coordination with employer paid leave? This is the first part that I'm like, I wonder how that's going to pan out. So it does allow coordination with the employer paid leave, but it does say that it appears to be more limited and applies only to leave allowed under the terms of a disability or family care leave under a collective bargaining agreement or employer policy. So I'm not exactly sure what that means. It means that there's going to be some type of coordination that's allowed. So I do expect that to be more described in the regulatory process and as regulations are issued. And that actually brings up another really great point. This is going to be a very fluid program. So usually when these plans are passed, then they start developing the regulations, and that's very continual. They look to other programs, they look at what other states are doing. They're looking at, okay, we really like what Oregon is doing here, or we really like what Maryland is doing here. We're going to borrow some of those regulations, and then they'll say, but we don't like what they're doing in this aspect, or we don't like this particular regulation. So there's really no way to predict exactly how the regulations are going to pan out here. You're going to see that the people who are drafting those are really borrowing from those other programs and figuring out what they think is going to work best for Virginia employers and Virginia employees. So it really is important to kind of watch those regulations as they develop. We monitor those as well. And particularly if we see anything that we're like, okay, this is going to be a big hardship for the employers or a big hardship on the way that it's going to impact employees, then there is an opportunity through the regulatory process to provide comments to those before they are finalized. And we do that sometimes. And then also a lot of times different associations will do that as well, especially if they figure out that, hey, this is going to be create a huge hardship on our members, a huge hardship on our employers. So be monitoring that regulatory process just to make sure that it's not something that's going to impact you so heavily that it's going to be very, very burdensome. So we are getting pretty close to the end here. So let's talk about how you can prepare. So first, I want to start out with some key dates to keep in mind. So again, April of this year is when it was signed into law. September 30th of 2027, they are going to set the maximum weekly benefit based on that state average weekly wage. By October 1st, 2027, they're going to set the initial contribution rate. So that's going to be your first hint of, hey, this is how much this program is going to cost me and how much it's going to cost my employees. January 1st, 2028 is the deadline for the Virginia Employment Commission to establish the program. So get it all set up, get the people in place, get all of the things in place, and get ready to start administering the program. April 1st, 2028 is when contributions will begin under the state plan, and it's their deadline to establish the necessary rules and regulations. And then December 1st, 2028 is when benefits begin. So that's one way that you can prepare. Another thing that you want to start thinking about is what type of plan do I want to go with? Because this statute does allow for you to choose the type of plan. You can either go with the state plan, or you can do a self-funded private plan, or you can do a private plan through an insurance carrier. You do have those options. So you want to look at, okay, what are the pros and cons of each of these plans? How am I going to, administer this? Where am I going to get the most help? Those types of things. And that's going to be unique to every employer, right? Not every employer is going to want to do the same thing. One thing that is pretty common on a private plan is you do have to, a lot of employers, and when a program is new, they think, oh, well, I can just up my benefits to start offering something that's equal to what the state will provide. But that's not the way it's going to work. You do actually have to provide the plan to the state. They have to approve it, and then you will have to administer it in the exact same way that the state would. So the same or better benefits under the same or better conditions. So you can't impose any more burdens on employees to apply or to receive the benefits. So it really is just a substitute for the state plan. It's going to be the exact same benefits, exact same conditions, all of those things. And you do have to receive approval from the private plan, and the same, or to use a private plan. Now, the same is true for insurance carriers who are going to offer a private plan. They would have to submit that to the state, get that approved, and then employers would have to apply to use that. It does have to, no matter what type of private plan, it has to provide those same rights, protections, benefits as the state administered plan. And then also it can never cost employees more than the contribution rate established by the state. So if the state comes in and says, we're going to set this at 1%, then we know that that's a 50-50 split between employers and employees, which means even under a private plan, that employee could not be charged more than 0.5% to pay for that private plan. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind when you're figuring out, okay, do I want to do a private plan? Do I want to do the state plan? A lot of times a private plan by a carrier will not charge the pre-funding premiums. So where the state plan starts April 1st, 2028, and benefits don't start until December 1st, 2028, a lot of private plans will start there, and it may be required by Virginia. In some states, it's required that private plan carriers cannot do contributions until the benefits begin, but that means that you would save money from April to December because you wouldn't be paying premiums there. You wouldn't start paying premiums until December of 2028 when the program goes live. Now, I keep referencing these 2028 deadlines. We don't, in every other state that has established a paid family medical leave program, they have had to extend deadlines beyond what they initially anticipated. I'm not saying that's going to happen here, but I'm saying we need to monitor that. We need to make sure that these dates end up being the actual effective dates of the program, because this is a really big undertaking for the state to set up and to try to get everything rolling. So we're going to monitor those dates, make sure that they are going to actually be the implementation dates. And if not, make sure that employers are updated, they have a little more time, all of those things. But for right now, we're going to assume that April 1st, 2028 is the date for those contributions to the state plan. December 1st, 2028 is going to be the date for benefits. So the earlier you can start preparing is going to be, it's going to be much easier on you. You have all of your ducks in a row. You've already looked at your policies. You've already coordinated with your legal counsel. You've already made sure that, your FMLA policy is in alignment with what you're going to need to do under the paid family medical leave program. You've already made sure that your call out procedures are in your handbook and they're exactly what you want them to be, and they've accounted for all of the rules in the paid leave program. So definitely start thinking about, okay, what policies are going to be impacted here? What procedures are going to be impacted? What do I need to update? And then you could reach out to your legal counsel to make sure that you're going to be on ready to go as soon as this starts. And so having that plan ahead of time is going to be the most beneficial to you. You do not want to start April 1st, 2028 thinking about these things. And then you want to provide that training to the employees who are going to be administering this, provide training to your supervisors or anybody who can have an impact on an employee's job about the job protection elements, about the prohibitions on discrimination and retaliation. If you get that training program in place, make sure that everybody's aware of it long before it starts, and that's going to be much better for you. Making sure that you're not behind the 8 ball there and trying to figure out how to implement this at the last minute. So next year, I think 2027 is going to be really important for all of you to start looking into this, making sure that you have everything ironed out well before this program goes live. At some point, you'll need to notify those employees. A lot of that is going to be described in the regulations. So monitor those requirements. We'll be monitoring those as well. And then I have a QR code here for you to subscribe to our Legal Buzz. We send out updates on these types of programs, the big updates. So it's not going to be, we're not going to spam your inbox. We're not going to send you a whole bunch of things. This is just going to be those big updates that impact you and that we want you to be aware of so that you're prepared in advance. And then, of course, we are here to help. We do have that insight with PFML in other states. So if you have any questions about the experience that other states have seen when they implement these programs, we are happy to provide you any of that information or data that we have. We do also have a lot of really happy public school employers there in Oregon that can provide you some more information about, hey, this is what our experience is. I know some of them personally, and they would be more than willing to speak to you on, hey, here's what we had to do, and here's the processes that we had to change. Now, again, their program is different, right? So it's similar, but there's going to be differences, but it really does help to kind of learn from peers, learn from other experience and what other states have seen. And then, of course, we will provide ongoing support and communication for employers and employees. One of our value propositions is, hey, we just want to make sure employers are educated and employers have all of the information that they need when this type of program comes in, and then assist in any education efforts that you need for your employees as well. So that, I mean, I kind of went through that pretty quickly. That is the end here. If you have questions, your kind of local contact there is going to be either Eric Bauer or Putty David. Putty is the one that kind of kicked this off. Here's his here's his contact information if you have any questions or want any information there. I am in Oklahoma City. You can also email me. I have the same email style, melissa.mcduffie@americanfidelity.com. And I would be happy to help as well. But